Because even if you've been to an empty church, you know it's not empty. And whenever I come here during the week, it's, I don't get to see all of you, but the great vibes, or whatever you like to describe it, when I come here is always beautiful and amazing. After 4.5 years working here, it's always wonderful to walk into this building. So I'd like to start with a reading, and the reading will come from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said to him, You've given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, the lawyer asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, was moved with pity. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them, and he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend.' Which of these 3, do you think, was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" The lawyer said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." When I was in the 1st grade, going way back, I remember walking into my elementary school cafeteria, and there was a new cafeteria worker there. And when she saw me, she said, "I know you! We're neighbors! Hi, neighbor!" This was awkward because I had never seen her before in my life. And she was certainly not my neighbor. I lived in a rural route, tar-covered road. And I knew everybody where I lived because I'd been trick-or-treating to their homes. There was a wonderful elderly neighbor across the way, a young family across the road. My aunt and uncle lived next door, a couple more young families, and then a couple of farms. That was it. She did not live there. She was not my neighbor. But when you encounter a woman who's preparing her food, who might be a little crazy, you don't know. So I did then what I would do now, go, So one day we were out driving in an area, and probably about a mile and a half away from our home, I saw her. She was out doing some yard work, and I saw where she lived, and I thought, she's not my neighbor. She was at least a mile away. So I mentioned this to my mother, and my mother responded, "Well, the rural area, it was referred to as the Hill. I don't know why. But she said, well, we're a small community. Maybe she just assumes that everybody who's on the Hill is her neighbor." I gotta admit, I was skeptical of this interpretation of the word neighbor. But thus, at age 6, I was already wrestling with the question, who is my neighbor? And we have it in our reading this morning, the parable of the Good Samaritan, as you now know, even though there's really no reference to the Samaritan being good, but it's obvious. And so, even without the cultures that play in the parable, it's a good person in the story, it's quite obvious. And so, the lawyer, he's an interpreter of Scripture, that's what that references. And so when he asked Jesus the question, it is a challenge, it's a test for Jesus. Now, whether the lawyer was hostile or is pleased with the answer Jesus gave, we don't know. But, so, it's also worth noting in the previous chapter, Jesus has an encounter with Samaritans, and it doesn't go well. And it goes so poorly that two of his disciples say to Jesus, you know what, we should pray to God to destroy them. Obviously, Jesus rebukes them. But just think of that today. Imagine a Ukrainian who would tell a story where a Russian was the hero. That's kind of what the Samaritan would have been. So this was an enemy saying, no, this was the hero of the story, obviously. And, that's a very important thing to think about. And, traditionally when you interpret this parable, it's a way to take away, give the benefit of the doubt to one another. And one way to look at it, I think, today, though, is to say, we cannot take petty things, that allow us to divide us. Bigotry has no place in the kingdom of God, according to Christianity. So we cannot stereotype and withhold grace to a group of people. Now, my perspective is Christianity. That's my background. And I don't have rose-colored glasses about my religion. And if you look at the parable, it doesn't have it either. The villains of the story are a priest and a Levite. These would have been good religious people. So they're the ones who fail to do what's right. So even Jesus is pointing out in this parable that this is not working out well from a religious perspective. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. But I'm reminded of a story about Peter Gomes. He was a late chaplain at Harvard for a very long time. And he told a story of a student who came up to him, a student who was raised in a secular family, but was taking courses to become a social worker. And he was taking a class on the history of social movements. And when he started reading these, it was like nearly every story, it was Christians leading the way. And he was just so impressed and moved by this that the next time he went home, he decided to attend a church for the first time. And I don't know what church he attended, but the 2 weeks that he attended, the church had negative attitudes toward women, LGBTQ people, and Muslims. And he couldn't reconcile what he had read in his classes with the modern church he had attended. And so as he went back from the break to attend more history classes, he kind of discovered that Christianity went from being the leader at the forefront, making great things happen, to being the people who were resisting the change to help people. And so the students let this pour out to Reverend Gomes one day, and just finally, in exasperation, closed his story with the question, what happened to you people? And unfortunately, it's a great question. I sometimes wonder if I were just maybe 5 years younger, if I would still be in the church. The basics I grew up with, that God loves you no matter what, and it's the job of the church to do the same, seems to have been pushed to the side. Today we have an observation of far-right politics taking control of the church in many areas. It's a relentless march in the name of purification and votes. But if Christianity is about following the teachings of Jesus, how are we even here? Well, how does one who advocated peace get turned into a pro-military invasion person? How does a religious movement dependent upon women become the one that wants to take their rights away? How does a religion that brings good news for the poor become the religion that billionaires use to control people? How does the religion that welcomed the foreigner become the religion of anti-immigration? Well, the answer is long, obviously, because we've got 2,000 years of history, but I'll keep it very simple. It's corruption of political power over the centuries, and they get like-minded people into religious leadership roles, and that kind of takes over. For more recent and U.S.-centric, when Dwight Eisenhower became president, he encouraged Americans to take up religious attendance and practices, thinking it would be good for helping build better communities. So it did help in many areas, but there was problems that arose quickly. And it was kind of interesting. We came across a Look magazine from the mid-1960s, where it talked about Christianity in the United States at that point. And you'd swear we were reading, here's the history of where Christianity went wrong in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Instead, it was a prophetic piece saying, here's why it's going to fail. And largely it was racism and the Vietnam War, that Christian pastors were saying, hey, as Christians, we should be supporting civil rights, and we should be opposed to the Vietnam War. And this was already having congregants saying, oh, we don't like that at all. We're actually kind of in favor of the racism, and we want to support the Vietnam War. And so that was a huge issue, and that's kind of where we have the decline of the American church in the U.S. in the last century. So, at this point, American religious experiment falls apart. The old ways take over. And now we kind of live in a time over international issues. Authoritarian regimes are lurking in the wings, not just here, but in many other countries who are experiencing it already or could potentially experience it. And the violence is ramping up. And we don't like to deal with issues. We like to divide into groups and demand purity in that group. It's sometimes fascinating to me to see someone like, we agree on 95% of things, and they just kind of attack their own group because they want you to be 100% behind them. Meanwhile, the other group gets to get away with doing their own thing. We have an issue where we don't trust our neighbors. We want to learn religious or political views and just kind of put people into a box and say, oh, I know who they are. But that's not the essence of Christianity. It was meant to be a liberation from these values, and these values are not, what we're experiencing now is not new. But Christianity says we are not to be confined by borders or other divisions that the power figures impose upon us. We are supposed to be a people of many races, languages, and cultures. We want to emerge from a history of strife and death to seek a future of abundant life and health. In Christianity, we acknowledge the presence of Christ among us in each individual we recognize. We've been enduring the power of violence, but we must reconcile to the power of tolerance. I once taught an adult ed class at the church. And one Sunday, I thought, well, I'll do a thing on LGBT and Christianity. And most of the class were afraid of this. Not because they were opposed to gay people, that was not the case at all. They were afraid that if they heard the text that were used to condemn gay people, that they were like, oh, we have to condemn gay people now. And these were lifelong churchgoers. So either they didn't know how to read the Bible or weren't reading it. And even though in their heart of hearts, people, God must love gay people, it was wrong for us to condemn them, they were kind of confident that the fundamentalists were right, and we would read the text and we could say, oh, yep, God hates gays, it's there in black and white. And this misses an important thing that Christianity is supposed to say, which is gospel or good news. When Jesus had the support of women, and women were very much put down at that time, they were an oppressed group. When they heard the teaching of Jesus, they weren't saying, more of the same, yay, we want this. No, he was giving them something different. He was telling them they were valued. When he said he had good news for the poor, it again wasn't, oh good, more of the same. He was saying something that no one else was saying at the time. And it took hold because it was good news to them. And very quickly, unfortunately, it was lost. But we still live with that. People think that, oh, it's not good news for these people, even though we're told it is. Because the fundamentalists will speak so authoritatively, and so others are just afraid to challenge them over their own texts. So, but you asked me here about how to build a community. And unfortunately, I don't have a detailed plan. If I did, I'd happily share it with the world. We certainly are in need of it. Now, you're a Unitarian Universalist. You figured out hundreds of years ago that Jesus is not the only way to express God or peace and love to one another. And that's great. It's important to know that. But I want to suggest the parallel with Jesus as something to keep in mind as we talk about building a community. There's a couple of parables that Jesus has. One is a parable of the 99 sheep and the lost sheep. And in this parable, Jesus, or the shepherd, leaves behind 99 sheep in the fold to go out and rescue one sheep. It's a foolish act. And when this is taught in churches, it's like, isn't it great? You're the one that Jesus came after. Isn't that awesome? And it is. But I also wonder, what about the 99? What are they thinking? What are they supposed to do? And perhaps the most famous parable Jesus ever told, the prodigal, we have a wayward child returning home. And again, when this is taught in churches, isn't it great? Despite all the horrible things the son did, he was forgiven and welcomed back in the family. Isn't that great news? And it is. But what about the other sibling? The one who had been the good child, who stayed home and did what Dad said. He was kind of angry. He didn't get a party. The wayward son got a party, but the faithful one did not. We kind of only focus on that good part of those stories, and we forget 99 were left behind. We forget the good faithful child was left there and not giving any reward for faithful living. And sometimes we forget that we're those people too. And we have to remember to take care of that lost sheep, that wayward brother. And that's just something we forget. Because it's just important to those parables as ones that were saved. We are living these stories today. We see anti-immigration is everywhere. Not only in the U.S., many parts of Europe, these political parties are just based on being anti-immigration or rising up. Here's the bumper sticker, Montana is full. State with plenty of land, there's only over 1 million people, lots of space for people to move into. I don't think Montana is full. I've often thought, what immigration could do for eastern Montana. You see all these dying small towns. I wonder, what if immigrants came in? Not affluent people who would raise up their prices, but immigrants who would start businesses and restaurants. People would bring jobs to the community, shopping, boost that economy, have religious organizations grow again, parks to get used, tear up buildings, make new. There's a pride that community may not have had for about half a century. But even when I tell people who agree with me on this, they would say no, because they would fear a racial or ethnic violence against those immigrants who move into those towns. We learned that the election of a half-black man brought out some pent-up racism in this country. Many thought we were long overdue to have a non-white president, and we were. But the problems that came up from it are just ridiculous. Many think we're long overdue to have a woman president, and we are. But again, that sexism is underneath there. It's just ridiculous and growing. When Jesus was welcoming women and foreigners in the name of God, it also angered the crowds. Twisted though they may, the parables of Jesus show us something in opposition to the narrow-minded society. We are to be diverse in this creation. We have a neighborhood that's living our lives as both personal and communal. We are to help each other, supporting as best we can. In the parable of the sermon, the Samaritan does not simply help the dying person. They go above and beyond. They seek out the proper care, provide the funds necessary for the healing, and come back to check on the person. There is no connection, nothing else to draw him in to help that poor man, except that it was simply the right thing to do. Loving one another is difficult, especially when we want to place barriers, but it is what God is calling us to do. Different religion, different nationality, different gender, different economic class, different race. In Christianity, it cannot matter. Who is my neighbor? Well, 6-year-old me thought my neighbor was the person either really next door or just down the road. But in this parable, the neighbor is the children of God. And the traditional Christian thought, that's everyone. It is a vision even beyond that crazy little cafeteria worker. But we live in an era of trolling. Owning someone is far more important nowadays in our political and social discourse. And we lose how to properly interact with one another. But trolling doesn't bring us together. Perhaps building a community isn't some new, far-out idea, but rather just getting back to the basics, being kind to one another. A place where we can look different, disagree, but still belong. Or we can still have a civil voice. A good community must recognize a diverse history and the gifts that come in. We need to develop hearts and minds. A good community must listen and persist when the other individual does not want to listen. And to use Unitarian language, it must recognize the inherent worth of each individual. Perhaps the best teacher of being a neighbor in our recent years came from Reverend Fred Rogers. He was a Reverend Presbyterian Church. I call him St. Fred Rogers. Pope really needs to get on that. But I'd like to show you a clip. You may have seen it before. And the background of this is the previous administration promised, I believe, $20 million to PBS, which was a new thing at that time. And the new administration came in and said, well, we don't like PBS, and if we had our way, we would just do away with it altogether. But that would not be popular. So they thought, well, we'll cut the funding in half, but we just can't cut the funding in half. So what we'll do is we'll take the half and put it toward the Vietnam War. Because people who were probably opposed to PBS were probably supportive of the Vietnam War. So that was the plan. And the chair of the committee hearing PBS try to make the case to keep that money was Senator John Pastorius, Democrat from Rhode Island. And he felt like the new administration, sort of the Nixon administration, he was in agreement. He wanted to cut the funding to PBS and give it to the Vietnam War. He had a reputation even before this. He was kind of one of the most gruff, impatient men in the Senate. And he was known for being very aggressive. He probably was one of the trolls of his day. He loved to just needle people and put them down. That was what he was known for. And the people who spoke before Mr. Rogers, he would just interrupt them, be rude to them, and attack them for their thoughts. And most people would simply, they wrote down the statement and would read it at the Senate committee, and that irked him. And he, right before Mr. Rogers spoke, he made a comment on that. He was just so sick of people reading the statements that they've written. So things were not looking good, but then it was Mr. Rogers' turn to speak.
We in public television are proud of Fred Rogers. I'm proud to present Mr. Rogers. All right, Roger, you got them all. Senator Pastori, this is a philosophical statement and would take about 10 minutes to read, so I'll not do that. One of the first things that a child learns in a healthy family is trust. And I trust what you have said, that you will read this. It's very important to me. I care deeply about children. My first children make you happy if you read it. I'd just like to talk about it if it's all right. My first children's program was on WQED 15 years ago. And its budget was $30. Now, with the help of the Sears Roebuck Foundation and National Educational Television, as well as all of the affiliated stations, each station pays to show our program. It's a unique kind of funding in educational television. With this help, now our program has a budget of $6,000. It may sound like quite a difference, but $6,000 pays for less than 2 minutes of cartoons, 2 minutes of animated, what I sometimes say, bombardment. I'm very much concerned, as I know you are, about what's being delivered to our children in this country. And I've worked in the field of child development for 6 years now, trying to understand the inner needs of children. We deal with such things as the inner drama of childhood. We don't have to box somebody over the head to make him to make drama on the screen. We deal with such things as getting a haircut, or the feelings about brothers and sisters, and the kind of anger that arises in simple family situations. And we speak to it constructively. It's a half hour every day. Most channels schedule it in the noontime as well as in the evening. WETA here has scheduled it in the late afternoon.
Could we get a copy of this so that we can see it? Maybe not today, but I'd like to see the program.
I'd like very much for you
I'd like to
to
see the program itself, for any one of them, you see.
We made 100 programs for EEN, the Eastern Educational Network, and then when the money ran out, people in Boston and Pittsburgh and Chicago all came to the fore and said, we've got to have more of this neighborhood expression of care. And this is what I give. I give an expression of care every day to each child to help him realize that he is unique. I end the program by saying, you've made this day a special day by just your being you. There's no person in the whole world like you, and I like you just the way you are. And I feel that if we in public television can only make it clear that feelings are mentionable and manageable, we will have done a great service for mental health. I think that it's much more dramatic that two men could be working out their feelings of anger, much more dramatic than showing something of gunfire. I'm constantly concerned about what our children are seeing. And for 15 years I have tried in this country and Canada to present what I feel is a meaningful expression of care.
Do you narrate?
I'm the host, yes. And I do all the puppets, and I write all the music, and I write all the
Well, I'm
scripts.
supposed to be a pretty tough guy, and this is the first time I've had goosebumps in the last 2 days.
Well, I'm grateful, not only for your goosebumps, but for your interest in our kind of communication. Could I tell you the words of one of the songs which I feel is very important?
Yes.
This has to do with that good feeling of control, which I feel that children need to know is there. And it starts out, what do you do with the mad that you feel? And that first line came straight from a child. I work with children, doing puppets in very personal communication with small groups. What do you do with the mad that you feel? When you feel so mad you could fight. When the whole wide world seems oh so wrong, and nothing you do seems very right. What do you do? Do you punch a bag? Do you pound some clay or some dough? Do you round up friends for a game of tag or see how fast you go? It's great to be able to stop when you plan the thing that's wrong and be able to do something else instead. And think this song. I can stop when I want to, can stop when I wish, can stop anytime. And what a good feeling to feel like this. And know that the feeling is really mine. Know that there's something deep inside that helps us become what we can. For a girl can be someday a lady, and a boy can be someday a man.
I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful. Looks like you just done the 20-minute
Notice how quickly the senator's attitude changed toward Mr. Rogers. 1 minute in, he was interrupting him and treating him as he did everyone else. By about 3 minutes in, Rogers had rapt attention of him, and in 5 minutes he changed the way he looked at things. It's a great model, so when we ask ourselves, who is my neighbor? This simple, powerful moment, with hundreds of people in the room watching, became an intimate moment just between the two of them. It will come as no surprise that Mr. Rogers was a good neighbor. It's a wonderful example gifted to us. We don't know how things turned out for the lawyer, but we do know what Mr. Rogers did. He sought to be the one who showed mercy, the one who would do the right thing. And Jesus offers that charge in the parable then and to us today. Go and do likewise.